The Fish, Elizabeth Bishop. I caught a tremendous fish and held him beside the boat, half out of water, with my hook, fast in a corner of his mouth. He didn't fight, he hadn't fought at all. He hung a grunting weight, battered and venerable and homely. Here and there his brown skin hung in strips like ancient wallpaper, and its pattern of darker brown was like wallpaper, shapes like full-blown roses, sustained and lost through age. He was speckled with barnacles, fine rosettes of lime, and infested with tiny white sea lice, and underneath 2 or 3 rags of green weed hung down. While his gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen, the frightening gills, fresh and crisp with blood that can cut so badly, I thought of the coarse white flesh, packed in like feathers, the big bones and the little bones, the dramatic reds and blacks of his shiny entrails, and the pink swim bladder like a big peony. I looked into his eyes, which were far larger than mine, but shallower and yellowed, the irises backed and packed, with tarnished tinfoil seen through the lenses of old scratched isinglass. They shifted a little, but not to return my stare. It was more like the tipping of an object towards the light. I admired his sullen face, the mechanism of his jaw, and then I saw from his lower lip, if you could call it a lip, grim, wet, and weapon-like, hung 5 old pieces of fish line, or 4, and a wire leader with the swivel still attached, with all their 5 big hooks grown firmly in his mouth. A green line frayed at the end, where he broke it, 2 heavier lines, and a fine black thread, still crimped from the strain and snap when it broke and he got away. Like metals in their ribbons, with their ribbons, frayed and wavering, a 5-haired beard of wisdom trailing from his aching jaw. I stared, and victory filled up the little rented boat. From the pool of bilge, where oil had spread a rainbow, around the rusted engine, to the bailer rusted orange, the sun-cracked thwarts, the oarlocks on their strings, the gunwales, until everything was a rainbow, 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 and I let the fish go.
The Fish, by Elizabeth Bishop, analyzed using Ciardi. The speaker of the poem is a person who goes fishing recreationally, as can be told by the fact that the boat that the fishing was done in was rented. Now, the actual gender of said person is not known, but it can be assumed to be a woman, as Elizabeth Bishop herself often went fishing in Florida, and so most likely her stories translated into this one, causing the creation of this one, and thus the fisher is probably a woman. Now, the situation is the fisher catching a tremendous fish, or something of the catch of her lifetime. And as the story continues, the fish begins to be described, how it didn't fight, the fact that the skin is like ancient wallpaper, signifying that it's very old, or the fact that some of the patterns seem to have been lost with age, also signifying old, or the barnacles even. But there's also some bads to the fish, such as the white sea lice or the green weeds hanging off of it. Then there's a moment with a while signifying that there is a transition, but after this, it's a sort of change in attitude from a description of the fish to a description of what the speaker imagines of the fish, such as the gills being crisp with blood, or how the flesh is packed in like feathers, with the figurative language of saying like feathers. Or even like the details down to the pink swim bladder being described like a big peony, which is an interesting description of a swim bladder. But eventually it gets on to showing and talking about the eyes and how they're much larger than the fisher's own eyes, but also shallower and yellow. But at this moment, it shows a sense of pity on the fish, right here. And looking at all the eyes stuff, there's a much sense of pity in the state of the actual fish. And after which, when the fish shifted its eye a little, but not to return stare, it describes how the face of the fish seemed almost sullen, personifying the fish as if it were human, or something that could feel emotions of being sullen. Now, nearing the bottom, she finally notices another detail, describing them as grim, wet, and weapon-like, being that they were hooks and fishing lines sticking out of the fish's mouth. Now, a fish would not have hooks and fishing line out of its mouth unless it was able to escape, signifying that this fish has been able to escape many attempts at catching it beforehand, giving a greater pride to the actual fisher. Now, continuing on the back page, there's more description of the fishing lines, but in this way it's not talking about pride of the fisher, but rather of the fish itself, and how they're like medals and ribbons to the fish in being able to escape, or beard of wisdom trailing from its aching jaw, which is an interesting detail in the fact that it's mentioned that the jaw is aching, as that signifies that the fish has feelings and there's a slight amount of pity in there. But then it goes on to talk about victory, the victory and pride of the fisher itself. So the victory seems to begin expanding through the boat, describing each part of the boat, and as each part of the boat is described, it seems as if the victory expands to more, until one final climax at this end area, after which the fisher decides to let go of the fish. But this doesn't seem to be a hasty decision to let it go at, because the fisher spends the entire time describing the fish, and after which the fisher finally decides to let it go, meaning that the fisher probably felt a sort of pity on the fish, and also a sort of respect for said fish on being able to escape many times before, and hoping to leave it out there for others to try and catch. And that was an analysis of the fish.